So, looks like we are live.
Everyone is sound.
Are we live? Yeah, now we are.
We are? Yeah.
People are coming in. Excellent. Come on, lovely people, join us.
Slowly, the room is filling up.
Yeah, it's actually pretty fast, faster than rooms normally fill up. So, hello everyone. So I think we wait 1 or 2 minutes until everyone's got their hands on. Pretty cool. All right. So are we going?
I think we should.
Let's go, yeah. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this day for quite some time. This is going to be quite an extraordinary webinar, I believe, especially because we're bringing together two worlds, two different wine styles, and we'll all realize that they have quite a lot in common, actually. So without much further ado, I just kind of quickly want to introduce myself, and then I will talk about Ted Lemmon of Littorai, and Sebastian will introduce himself and talk about Dominik Sona and Koehler-Ruprecht, and then we'll jump right into the real webinar. So my name is Konstantin Baum. I'm a master of wine, and I do quite a lot of things. I run my own import and distribution business, but I also am the education ambassador for the California Wine Institute in Europe. So it's a great pleasure to talk to and about one of the wineries that are really important for the Californian wine scene, because Ted Lemmon and Littorai have brought a completely new approach to winemaking to California. And he's been a pioneer in what he's doing. So Ted actually started his winemaking career in Burgundy. He was the first American to run a domain in Burgundy, and this is kind of how he got his entry into the wine scene. He then moved back to California and looked for a place to set up his own winery in the early 90s, and settled in Sonoma, where he founded Littorai with his wife Heidi, and they are now making wines from different vineyards in the Sonoma coast, in the real Sonoma coast, and in Anderson Valley. Ted also helped found Burnt Cottage, a winery in New Zealand, where he also got involved with the person that kind of brought this whole thing together today, because the owner of Burnt Cottage is also the owner of Koehler-Ruprecht. And when they looked for a new head winemaker, a new person to run the winery, Ted kind of set up the connection between Koehler-Ruprecht and Dominik Sona. So I'm handing over to you, Sebastian, and your part with the introduction of Dominik and Koehler-Ruprecht. So let's do this.
Thank you, Konstantin. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Sebastian Bordthäuser. So skip the family name. It's Sebastian. It's easier. And I've been working as a sommelier in the fine dining for over 20 years until I quit like 2014 and went to work on myself. I work in sensory control, quality control. I do education. I write books. I'm an accredited Bordeaux tutor. Have some deals with some regions. I like the wines of Alto Adige. I like Portuguese wines, champagne, of course, just to give you an idea for my core interests. And of course, I do like German wines, and I do like Riesling. And actually, there's a lot of Riesling around here. But when it comes to the very, very core of essential wines, essential Riesling, who have always been great and who always will be great, I think there's no way not to come across Koehler-Ruprecht. And there are many sites, great sites, just like in Burgundy, where we have the Grand Crus, which always have been great vineyard sites for Riesling in Germany. And for sure, the one we're talking about tonight is one of them. But first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce the man himself, Dominik Sona. He's went to Koehler-Ruprecht, I think, in 2008. The history of, or even earlier.
No. Physically in 2010. Physically.
As a CEO, yeah, right. And ever since, you've been the man in charge, right?
That's what people say about me. That's what people tell me. Don't always feel like it, but that's what it is. Yes. Started 2010, and with the blending, I was involved in the blendings of 2008, which happened in 2009, when things were clear that I would start working for Koehler-Ruprecht in 2010, after the 2009 harvest. Yeah. And since then, I'm in Karlstadt. Enjoy a busy life, and of course, enjoy reading. That's the most important, pleasure we have these days.
Yeah, that's kind of crucial when you work for Koehler-Ruprecht to be enjoying Riesling. That's for sure. So I think we kind of kick off the tasting right away, because I think it makes more sense to get into the wine straight away, and then while we are tasting and drinking, we can talk more about the whole history and the winemaking philosophy and so on and so forth. So everyone who's ordered the wines can actually now pour them if you haven't. I think we all have poured them a little bit ahead, because it makes a lot of sense to give both of those wines a little bit more air. So go ahead and have a sip of wine. I'll actually show you where we are going to start in the Pfalz, and Sebastian and Dominik will talk a little bit more about the wine.
Yeah. Okay. You start your presentation.
Yep.
That's where we are all together.
Yep. That's and now we're getting
closer.
The hot spot.
Yeah.
The Grundschule Karlstadt is also
Yeah.
quite dominant in that
I think
map.
it's actually bus stop. I once traveled there by bus, which only few people do, because I think most of them you need a car. Nobody does it. So, as I said, I don't know if each and every one of you is familiar with the Koehler-Ruprecht, but Koehler-Ruprecht is a house with a long tradition, and this tradition is really strongly connected with the site, the winemaking, vinification, and everything. And the site, of course, as one of the greats in Palatine, and if not Germany, is the Saumagen, which literally translates to the pig's stomach. There's only speculations about how the name came up. Some say it's because the site is a bit shaped like a pig's stomach, but it's not the site. I mean, we have to go way back till 1810 to 1830s, when the name first popped up in documents and was defined in its outlines. But it has changed ever since. That means not for good, but in fact for bigger. It has been enhanced a couple of times. So there is something like the original Saumagen and the Saumagen today. And as in Burgundy, it's not only about the site. You always will have to know who is doing the wine on this special site. And it's same here. Who is doing the wine on this single site and in which part today? I think Dominik can talk about this later. So one thing, if we talk about Koehler-Ruprecht, of course, is tradition. I mean, if you look at the label, if you got the label in your hand, it's a really nice and lovely old school label on the bottle, which never changed. And it's not the only thing that never changed. Another thing is the winemaking. It's still, Koehler-Ruprecht is one of the last, or if not the very last, winemaker in Palatine who exclusively makes the wine in old wooden barrels. So there have been not only changes in the site Saumagen, but in the winemaking in Germany itself. And in the 60s, when cellar technique and engineering came up, everybody was going insane about this and changing to stainless steel, which of course changed the style of the wines. But in Koehler-Ruprecht, they've always been pretty much like this. So I would say old school, but I don't know if it's an old school or it's the only school or true school, but that's not the point here. And another specialty of Koehler-Ruprecht is the strong ties to the German system of predicates. So German wine laws is not only confusing to us Germans ourselves, but I think it's even more confusing to the people outside of Germany. So you have the VDP, you have the German wine law, you have this predicates, you have the like Kabinett, and then you have a Kabinett Trocken or a Kabinett Sweet. Some say it's only expected to be sweet, and some say it's not. So here we're having an Auslese, and Koehler-Ruprecht always was doing dry wines. So no sweetness here. So you might be tempted to think it's a sweet wine when you see Auslese, which in the German wine law way of thinking should be sweet, but it is not. It's something like an internal classification of Koehler-Ruprecht that say Kabinett is of course the lightest refreshing wine. The Spätlese is maybe more mineral, and the Auslese is like the Porsche, you know, the most powerful one, but not lacking elegance. So it's rather a definition of categories than a sticking to sugar levels while harvesting. And all these three things together, I think, make this wine, the history of the wine and the greatness of the wine. Dominik entered Koehler-Ruprecht in 2010, and whenever someone new comes to a winery or to any place, pretty often they want to change things how they've been done before, but Dominik didn't. He kept it pretty much like it was, but he was doing fine-tuning here and there. So by respecting the style of the house and of the wines, he was, I think, and he managed pretty good to have the wines even more refined without denying their character or tradition. And this is very, very fun to see, especially in this 16, which shows perfectly tonight here in the glass. So, Dominik, this was just a short introduction on you. I didn't want to bother you with telling all this, so let's talk the 16 Auslese wine.
Talk about the wine.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, everything's so far so good. What we define for the Auslese would be the golden and amber-colored berries. So that's our picking grade, not necessarily looking at the must weight. In 2016, we actually had to look at the must weight to reach the Auslese level, and we barely reached it. So we just reached the 92 Oechsle, which is the minimum must weight for Auslese and Pfalz. It's been a brilliant year. It's been another warm year, but it kind of has those in the wine, like the cool climate flavors, cool vintage flavors, like even the acidity is there, which is brilliant for a hot year. So it's most of the acidity is tartaric acid, which is a big surprise. And there was no rain, no mist for I think 8 weeks, and we were picking grapes for 6 weeks straight. We even had a break in between, and this was one of the last picks. There's one higher level of this wine, which will be the R, the reserve wine. But this is already, like you said, if you want to compare with cars, it would be the whatever Porsche or yeah, whatever. And then we go up to the next one would be the I don't know, the Tesla maybe in the future. In the future,
it's R or double R, right.
Yeah. It's when you look at the yellow button and where the Koehler-Ruprecht status, the Saumagen is just the main part is just like that's where the white the mouse is. Yeah, a little bit further to the right, to the left. Yes, and then down. Yeah, more or less. So those are terraces, and that's the south-facing slope, and that is where I mean, we do a true pick in all the blocks in the Saumagen, but this is our main vineyard, most important vineyard where we get usually the best grapes and then the best wines out. Yeah.
So how do the different vineyards in the Saumagen differ in terms of exposition? And
so what we see right now is all where the mouse is. That's where south facing is, and you see the AMG. You see the sporting field, the soccer field. This is all east facing. Further up, and then to the left. That's the soccer field, and this is all east-facing Saumagen. This is Terra Rossa in this area, so the red limestone, and in our south-facing is a little bit more like white limestone, with also less content, which is rich soil. There's no water problems. It's just like perfectly growing every year, so it's pretty good. But 16 is one of my favorite vintages, and I told it to every customer and to all of my friends, if there's another vintage like 16, I retire immediately after it. It's just too perfect. I'm not sure if I don't have a plan B yet, but I don't think there will be another vintage like 16. It's just like the acidity, the balance, the etheric, flavors, and the structure of the wine, and it's still a young wine, so it's meant to be drinking in another 15 years maybe, but it's already showing what's there. And also the harvest was so easy. The growing season was easy. We didn't have to work much, and which is like it's always good when you don't have to,
So you didn't have any problems with Peronospora in 16 in springtime. No. So you were blessed, right?
We were really lucky. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit further to the east in the flat vineyards, and there were a couple issues. Not in Saumagen, not at all. Yeah. So
Can I ask you a question? Can you go back to the bigger picture for those of us who are not specialists in the faults on where the tradition of making Trocken wines came from at KR? In other words, was this a long-time tradition of the Pfalz, or was this a real peculiarity of Koehler-Ruprecht?
I think if you look at Germany, it is in Pfalz is the longer tradition to make dry wine than in other places for Riesling and for other places than in Germany. And in Pfalz especially, I think Koehler-Ruprecht was one of the first starting. Well, of course, they made it back before the sweet 50s, 60s, 70s. They did make sweet wine, a little bit of more sweet wine in the 70s as well, but then they changed in the 80s and 90s to mainly dry wines. And in this case, they were the first doing that again, doing mainly dry wines. Yeah.
And why that transition? Why did they transition to mostly dry?
Well, I think that is the personal flavor, personal taste of the previous owners of the Philippi family, as well as probably a chance to. I mean, we don't have a lot of mist. We don't get the perfect botrytis. The botrytis here is always a little wet. The wines are not as precise. Sweet wines are not as precise as the Mosel or the Rheingau Auslese or Beerenauslese. So maybe that was one of the reasons, as well as having a new niche for the wines. You know, everyone made sweet wine and they made dry wine. And as soon as the demand for dry wine was a little higher, the demand was there. The people came first to them. Yeah.
And I have another question on that, if I can, Konstantin, which is, was that controversial, Dominik? I mean, was KR looked as a rebel, or I mean, I know you weren't there then or anything, but I'm curious about the historical nature vis-a-vis the neighborhood.
Yeah, KR was more a rebel in terms of keeping the barrels than making always dry wines.
And
so
we're talking about
keeping the barrels, keeping the wild ferments, basically focus on the previous organization of the VDP, that's the natural wine auctioneer. So keeping the focus on the natural wine, which basically they said that they don't want to chaptalize. That's why we still stick with the predicates, because the predicates wine is never chaptalized. And I think that's kind of more the rebel thing than moving on to dry or sweet wines. Yeah.
And then just to be clear, we're talking about casks, not small barrels.
Exactly. 300, 600, 1200, 1500, and 2500 liters, which is a Stück barrel, which is 1200 liters a piece. That's how we call it. Yeah. Like 1200 a dozen. Yeah.
What I find quite interesting.
Yep.
Sorry, Dominik. What I find quite interesting in having you two here in this webinar, and I already see from Ted's questions that there is maybe some more background that needs to be explored. There is the fact that you both kind of represent very distinctive wineries that follow their own path. But the main difference, at least in my opinion, is that Ted kind of started with a blank slate and in a place that was a blank slate, basically. So in the Sonoma Coast, not a place that was known for winemaking, whereas Dominik started in a winery with a lot of tradition in a place that has been making wine for a long, long time. So my question, and it might be a good transitional question as well to kind of move on to Ted's wine, is Ted, for you, what do you miss in terms of? I personally see a lot of advantages in starting with a blank slate, but for you, what is the big advantage in having such an interesting history, such a long history that you can fall back on when you're making wine and winemaking decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, but it's an easy one, right, to answer, Konstantin. I mean, just when you were drawing the outline of Salmagen, right, the ability to just knowing that the vineyard is great is huge. In other words, there's an enormous history of Salmagen or any other number of Grand Cru type sites around Europe that we all know make great wine. And so really your job, if you're taking over an estate there or whatever, is to live up to the expectation of that site. And when you're working in a region that's unknown, no one knows what to expect. And a lot of times they actually spend more time projecting what they think you should be doing on you, right? Than allowing you to discover the place that you're working in. So, I mean, I found working in Burgundy and loving European wine as much as I do that it's like a drug. It's hard to give up, Konstantin, right? I mean, when you're working with Claude La Roche, boy, that's a pretty good drug, and you can feel pretty confident, and you feel like you've always got a parachute, I guess, in some ways would be the analogy. Whereas when it's all new, who knows? I mean, every year is a discovery.
But on the other hand, it doesn't feel, or it isn't as easy to disappoint people. Maybe if you're messing up your Claude La Roche fruit and make a wine that is not representative of that, might be more embarrassing than messing up the fruit of a vineyard that doesn't have a name, right?
Absolutely, and of course, if you're to take that Burgundian model, if you're lucky enough to have 3 or 4 Grand Crus in your cellar. And they don't taste the way they should, yeah, that's a problem, right? There's no separation of flavor. Of taste. That's huge.
But if there's no history to that side, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, how do you know if you messed it up or if just the place isn't good? I mean, you have to find out as well, right? Because you can't rely on anything.
Sure, for us, you do. You have to figure out whether it's a good place. I think that's where, Sebastian, the European history is so important, right? All of us tend to forget, at least I do, maybe you guys don't, that, you know, European viticulture is an inheritance from the Middle East, and that it came up through Greece and Turkey, etc., and later into Italy. And so Europe really has this enormous foundation. Well, we stand on the same foundation. It just is that it's more European. So that ability, I mean, first time I went to Koehler-Ruprecht, the first time I was in Karlstadt, right? I was with Dominik, so of course he showed me Saumagen, but he didn't need to show me that was a great vineyard. I mean, you can just stand there and you can smell it, right? It's south facing. It's got that beautiful, I can't remember what % slope is, but gentle to moderate slope. And that's the brilliance of European viticulture, is if you spend enough time visiting the great vineyards of Europe, you can smell what a good site is, or at least what site that has great potential. Now, is it going to be, you know, the best or a B grade? You never know, but you can tell.
But on the other hand, for you, Dominik, I mean, you made wine in California, right? You worked abroad before. So do you sometimes feel like you would love to be in a place where not every law is already written and everything is kind of set in stone, and you could decide what you want to do?
In case of, that's a good expression, that not every law is written. You know, that's a pretty good expression, because here things are, you know, they for sure, we know the sites, we know how to do things. It's probably much easier, but if you wanna, it's like the excitement is still there. But if you're up for an adventure, I'm not sure if Europe is the right place. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's everything, or not everything, but there's a lot of things which are set. And if you think that, you know, especially these days with the climate change, you know, if you I mean, are things still the same in 5 or 10 years? And but if you're stuck in a village in France where you can only plant one variety, like what do they do in 15 years or in 20 years? Germany is a little bit more liberal, but still there's the new world is a little, you know, if it doesn't grow well, they take the vineyard out and let trees grow, and then they move on to the next part. I mean, that's how they developed most of their countries. So that is a little bit more of a freedom, at least in your mind. But if the wine is as good or can be as good, I think they need to work way harder on the plant and in the cellar to get what they want, probably. Yeah. And that is a little easier in Europe, I would say.
Yeah. Just a brief point that I just want to make. I think I didn't make it in the beginning. It's great if you have questions, just answer them. And there's one just ask them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them all. There's one question on the Koehler-Ruprecht Pinot, whether it's grown in the same area. I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's there's another block around a little bit further south, but most is around the village. The Pinot is more or less mostly around the village. There's one block that's a little bit. Yeah, it's basically around the village. That's where we have other Pinot varieties, the Pinot vineyards, and. Not in Saumagen. Saumagen is Riesling and one little block of Muscatella. But the rest is the Pinot is around the Saumagen. Yeah.
Right.
Dominik, can I ask you the question about Saumagen that maybe is implied in some of what Konstantin was saying, which is, you know, when you took it over, okay, you've got the givens of, you know, maybe some constraints of spacing and orientation and stuff. but I know you've done a lot of work to try to improve the soils, etc. And can you speak to me as somebody from the new world about what it's like to try to, get the soils to be healthier when you inheriting a place that's been farmed for so long?
Well, that is a question we still work on from year to year. Well, I mean, the most essential and easiest way to start is the cover crop, right? That's something we do alternate every year. That's something we have to do, and then we do work with more and more with the compost, but mostly own done compost. We have that ESCA. ESCA is a big problem in virus, as well as a big problem in old vineyards. There's blocks. There's in just the neighbor village further south. There's an old Roman press house, and it's been an old Roman press and farmhouse. So that's how long there are vineyards, and you can see that there's huge problems. So we, in some vineyards, we just have them unplanted for a couple of years to rest the soil, and now we work a little bit with the Terra Preta products, which is like a little bit like biochar, to activate again the soil fertility and life in soil, not necessarily fertility in speaking fertilizers. That is something.
It's not about legumes, right? It's not about trying to increase nitrogen. It's about
no. It's the life in the soil. Just to get the biodiversity. Not we see when we talk about biodiversity, we talk about the vineyard, the green, everything we see. But there's a lot of biodiversity in the soil. At least it should be in the soil, and that's what we try to reactivate, because there are blocks out there who are suffering for 2,000 years of viticulture. That's for sure. But it's a long process. But we're getting there slowly. And I mean, you guys are. I think you guys have your soil, and you don't need to, plow it or cultivate it as often as we have to. So we have to build it up and not only use it for now. Yeah. And Mark, the mainly soil types in Saumang is loess, loam, and limestone. To answer that question.
All right.
And did the wines taste different from those different soils?
They do. If you do the blind tasting with the different barrels, you pick out the barrels from Saumang for sure. Not necessarily saying that you can pick up the barrel from the Terra Rossa. Yeah. But there is a huge difference between Saumang and not Saumang. That's a huge difference, which is always nice.
And for those of us who don't know Karlstadt well, is there another or there are other very special vineyards within Karlstadt? Not that KR farms them necessarily, but just vineyards that are as famous as Saumang?
No, not really. I mean, there's the Annaberg, which we farm a little bit of Chardonnay in there. But the most important is the Saumang vineyard, and probably the most important north of the epicenter, which is Deidesheim and Forst. I mean, it is, like Sebastian said, it is one of the most important and best Riesling vineyards in the area, if not in Germany, for dry Riesling. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I can say that with pride, because I'm not owning it, so I'm not from the village, so I can say it with pride. Yeah.
You like to hang around.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, we'll get back to Dominik, obviously, but I think it's time to also have a sniff of the Pinot. So for that, we need to fly around the world.
Change planets.
Yeah, pretty much. Feels a little bit like that. This is where Littorai is based, the Sonoma Coast AVA. It's generally shaped like a lobster. If you use your imagination, you'll see it. But see the claws right along the coast, and then goes deep into Carneros. So it's actually a pretty big AVA, and there's still quite a lot of controversy about whether this should actually be one AVA or whether it should be broken up, or whether we need a clear definition of what the coast is actually. But this is where Ted found his spot where he decided to settle down. Littorai means coasts, so I don't know whether the name existed before you found the place, or whether you decided to name it that because you were at the coast. From what I gathered, you actually definitely wanted to have something somewhere along the coast because you wanted to have a cool climate, and that is obviously crucial when it comes to California. And the climate in California is that the Pacific is the main engine for influencing the climate. The Pacific is a pretty cold ocean, bringing cold water from the North Pole along the coast, and wherever that air that comes with the water actually gets onto land, it cools down the climate quite a bit. And that's why the places right at the coast are much cooler than most of the places further inland. And this is also one of the reasons why there's a bit of controversy whether the AVA actually represents the real coast, because the further you go inland, especially if you go up to Healdsburg, the impact of the Pacific is obviously far less pronounced than it would be right on the coast. But we are going to taste. Well, this is just an image of the Sonoma coast. Obviously, the coast is very diverse, so there are lots of different views. But this is a beautiful view. That's why it's included in this presentation, and it kind of shows that it is different to, for example, the Napa Valley, probably one of the places that most people know best from California. It is much more isolated. There's much more nature. There are small pockets of vineyards. It's not all planted to vines. There's no monoculture as such in those places on the real Sonoma coast. So it's a bit of a different place, and it's one of the most beautiful places for me. I actually wanted to drive up the coast this summer, but that didn't work out for obvious reasons. But I'll come back and do that next time. So let's have a look at the winery. This is where Ted and Heidi settled down with their winery. It's actually 12 hectares, or what, 30 acres, right? Of ground, but it's not all planted to vines. Just a few acres are actually planted to a vineyard, which is this vineyard here, right? Mm-hmm. The pivot vineyard. So and that's obviously the wine that we are tasting, or hopefully everyone's tasting, but I'm guessing not everyone has it in its glass. But yeah, talk a little bit about the pivot in particular, and why you decided to plant your vineyard, or that one vineyard. You're obviously sourcing fruit from lots of different places, but why you decided to settle down there.
So you can see from these great pictures that this part of the Sonoma coast is a little more farmland-ish than the north, which is more heavily forested. And as Konstantin suggested, there will be the Sonoma coast. I won't say it'll be chopped up. The AVA will continue to exist, but there's going to be a West Sonoma coast AVA in a minute. But this is a pretty good perspective on our property. Basically, the winery going up is the property, the forest to the left, the pivot in the middle, and then those open fields, which we hay and are part of our compost stream. So the goal is to maintain a diversified farm and to have a diversified wine farm. Let me get rid of that. Sorry about that. That can be sort of a fertility center for the rest of our vineyards. So this is where we make the compost, etc. But right now you can see from the picture that it's a gentle south-facing slope. So those rows are running north-south, and it really is sort of the heart of the property for us, and really was the reason for buying this particular property. And as some of the people on the call will know, Littorai makes a lot of vineyard designated Pinot Noir, so more than 10 different vineyard designates. This is one of the estates. It's obviously one of the most important to us because of the fact that it's where the winery is located. And the goal here is, if we can, to dry farm, which we have been doing for the last 4 years. So this piece is no longer irrigated. And it produces, I think, really the wines you have in the glass, Konstantin. They have a fruit which is, yes, they have California fruit, but to me, I don't know what you would say, but it's almost more of a vegetal, you know, underripe blackberry or raspberry. It's a kind of a crunchy fruit quality. I don't know how you would describe it, but it's not the classic big fruit California wine. I think that the 17 is very typical of what this site produces. I don't know, what's your impression of it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, those wines, all of the wines that you're making have a pretty clear handwriting, and I alluded a little bit in the introduction to the fact that you learned your craft in Burgundy. This story is quite long, so I don't think we have enough time to talk about it all, but it's quite exciting how you fell into different got into different wineries and worked into different wineries, and then ran Guy Rouleau in Meursault as the first American. So what would obviously be like the obvious connection would be to say this is Burgundy made in California, but it's not. I mean, you're obviously looking to express the cool places in California and the wines that come from those vineyards that are very much influenced by the Pacific Ocean, and by sourcing fruit from those vineyards, from those very cool places, you're actually showing a totally different expression of what California is able to offer. And for me, as a taster, it's not Burgundian as such. It's very Californian, but it is this bright fruit, this very intense cherry fruit flavor, the polishedness of the flavor, and the great integration with slightly spicy notes or herbaceous notes, like black tea, that are very thought through, very well made, including this sizzled tannin and the beautiful acidity, which is very well integrated. So for me, it's not a typical Burgundian wine. It's just a cool climate expression from California, and this is obviously something that you pioneered as one of the first wineries that were actually making wine in the true Sonoma Coast. But it's certainly something that we see much more now than we did in the early 90s. More winemakers are brave enough now to do something like that, and it's exciting. It's a very exciting wine. I mean, this is obviously also a baby, but it's already very approachable for me. It's very tempting to drink it now, but I'm pretty sure that it will last for quite a bit longer, even though this is actually from a very young vineyard, right? This was planted in 2004, so 13 years is not a long time for Pinot Noir vines to develop.
If you go back one slide, Konstantin, I don't know if you can go back to the map.
Yeah.
Can you go back and we'll just...
That was the picture?
Before the picture, right?
Yeah.
There you go. I guess it's 2 slides back. There we go. You had the, yeah, there we go, with the AVA on it. So if you take your cursor, Konstantin, and go from the G in Guerneville up above, yeah, keep going up. You see the G in Guerneville to your right. Yeah, you don't have to go in closer. You can scroll back out if you can. I don't know if we'll be able to do this, you and I, from a distance.
Where do you want me to go?
See that? See the G right next to you in Guerneville?
Yeah.
Okay. If you can scroll out.
Scroll out. Okay.
A little bit, yeah. Let's see if we can get, the two of us can manage to pull this. Okay, that's good enough. Yeah, you can stop right there. And if you draw a line with your cursor from the G in Guerneville down between Littorai and Winery, just draw it, yeah, right there and go, keep going straight down, just like you're doing. Over to your right between Littorai and Winery.
But this way.
No, on a horizontal, on same direction as the line above it, sort of going from upper left to lower right. So you're going to go Guerneville.
Towards Santa Rosa, or
No,
From the Winery W to
yeah.
the Guerneville G.
Yes, exactly.
okay, so like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That line, if you continue that line south from the W in Winery, that will be the West Sonoma Coast AVA.
All right, I got you.
Okay.
So that AVA has been sitting at our beautiful government, which we will not speak about on this phone call, for the last 2 years. And there's no real controversy remaining about it, but it's our attempt to fix the fact that you alluded to, that the Sonoma Coast is just way too big. So the West Sonoma Coast will essentially be all of the areas that are dark green, including going all the way up to Hirsch and Flowers up north. So all of that long string bean, right, will become the West Sonoma Coast AVA. And as your photo showed, the key thing to understand is this is really rough mountainous country. There's not a lot of vineyards out there. The area where the pivot is the most settled, the most sort of farmland-like. And a lot of it is dense timber. Will never be planted.
So I got a question that is, yeah, basically to both of you, Dominik and Ted, which is obviously quite interesting. Is you're both doing your thing on two different parts of the planet, but there are quite a few similarities there. And one similarity is that both of you like organic and biodynamic viticulture, but you're not really committed to getting certified for that. I mean, as far as I know, both of you have no interest in getting a certification for organic or biodynamic viticulture. Would you maybe, Ted, start with your reasoning? Why don't you think it's necessary to get the certificates for organic or biodynamic viticulture?
Yeah, it's a big subject, but very briefly, for us, what matters to us is the work and doing the work that's involved, and not the what we call in English the gold star, right? The certification or the stamp of approval of either the government or some private organization. So we just want to do the work, Konstantin, and I don't really, certifications are fine, they have a role to play, and if somebody wants to criticize us for, for saying, well, how do I know you're doing what you claim? That's fine, I totally accept that criticism. The only thing I can say in response to that is, come visit, you come see what we're doing, and you tell me if you like it or not. But it's really about the passion for the work and a feeling as a first generation winery that I just don't want to spend my life filling out paperwork. I'd rather farm.
And it's also, I assume, more difficult if you don't own all of the vineyards, right? I mean, you're like roughly 50-50 in terms of estate grown fruit, 50% and 50% bought in. So right. I'm guessing that's would be much more difficult to handle with your suppliers.
Right. So the estate stuff, you could say, as you just did, well, you should go ahead and certify. And I gave you the reason why not. For the grower wines, yeah, that would be entirely driven by the individual growers. So we have Wendling Vineyard up in Anderson Valley, and it would be up to that owner to certify if they wanted to. But it is farmed biodynamically. I mean, we work with them quite intensely, but it would be their choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mostly agree with. Huh? Sebastian?
We're having a question from Mark about the difference between sustainable wine growing and organic in Sonoma or in Sonoma Coast.
All right.
More paperwork, less paperwork.
Yeah, you may want to blank out this stuff before Dominik explains why he does it.
Okay.
Sustainable means absolutely nothing. As far as I'm concerned, the whole Sonoma sustainable thing is kind of a joke there. You heard it from me, and I apologize if somebody on the call is offended.
Let's put it that way. Okay, good. So Dominik.
Yeah, well, I mostly agree with Tate's terms, and that's not to the paperwork. Let's go out and do the work in the vineyard. But in the biggest issue I have with the certifications is it takes the dynamic away from biodynamics. It's all, as long as something is certified, it's about something is written down. And it's like this rule is written down, this rule is written down, like spray work for the soil and all that stuff is written down, with even going back to certain dates where you have to do it and when you can start working it. And this, we're working with nature, and nature is not to define. Nature is not following, the rules we make. The schedules, exactly. And that's my main issue with all the certificates. We are very strong and strict if it comes to the predicate wine system, but it's a different subject. It's wine. It's the picked grapes. It's not, it's in the barrel, it's in the cellar, but not dependent on nature, not as much dependent on nature anymore as the growing grape. And that's something I just don't like with being certified. If you, like Ted said, if you want to see, then come and watch the vineyards, and then you will be convinced that by what we do. Yeah.
Even though it's kind of interesting with you, Dominik, because biodynamics is something that you practice, right? But that's probably one of the bigger breaks from the very tradition of Koehler-Ruprecht in terms of methods in the vineyard and in the winery, right? I mean, organic.
It's not there's no herbicide for the last 60 years.
Organic, but biodynamics weren't really part of the portfolio.
No.
Before.
No. Bernd, he never believed in cow shit. But you can only do it if you believe in it. So it's one of the reasons they never did it. And if we do it, then only the few people who believe it do it, and not necessarily our Polish helpers. I mean, they just don't know what they do, and so they don't do it. So it's the people who do it who believe in it. Yeah. And there's an impact on, like Ted asked the question, for the age of the soil, the age of the vineyards, not the age of the vineyards, but how long the vineyards are, the soil is used for vineyards. And it's one of the methods, I believe, is that's one of the ways to get the vitality back into the vineyard, the life back into the vineyard and into the product then later on. One of the few things we can do, and we can do that without a big, a major step, Yeah. And it doesn't have a lot of impact. It hasn't, in my belief, it has an impact on the wine, on the fermentation, but not too much on the flavors and not too much on the style of wine. Let's put it this way. Yeah.
All right.
So, Konstantin, I have a question. I want to mention one thing before we forget, is that some people on the call may wonder, why these two very different wineries are associated here, and that is because Dominik and I have known each other for a very long time. Dominik had worked for us at Littorai for a harvest back in 2006, and we became really close friends at that time and stayed friends. And then I have a great story about Dominik helping us out in Burn Cottage in New Zealand. And Dominik will remember this, he'll probably smile. But a lot of the soils in central Otago, right, are very wind-blown, highly eroded, low fertility, low organic matter soils with very little growing on them. And so if you're creating a vineyard in central Otago, it's actually quite helpful to work the soil and to work at a fair amount, just to try to build up through cover cropping, as Dominik alluded to, et cetera, soil tilth and humus, et cetera. And so we wanted to work the soil rows, the vine rows, right? It's at Burn Cottage. And so we got some equipment from Germany that's very well known, been around for a long time for working the vine rows. But, you know, it's good German equipment. You need to be thoughtful and you need to know how to use it. And a certain amount of subtlety is involved. You don't just get on the tractor and, you know, hit the go button and have it work automatically. And we couldn't get the crew to do it right. We just couldn't get the crew, no matter how hard we tried. It's called a Clemens. Clemens has a bunch of different fittings that goes on it, but it's a vine row tilling setup. And so I asked Dominik to come down one year and help us at Burn Cottage. And Dominik was kind enough to come down and spend, I don't remember Dominik, must have been more than a week, literally sitting out there in the rows with the guys on the tractors, helping them to get it right. And just getting them up to understanding the machine and how it worked and all that stuff. And it was just a great experience of, you know, we all think of wine culture as being related, but you go to different countries and how they function and how they interact with their farming is really different. So Dominik, thanks again for doing that. That was really awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I got one question, because we heard like that Ted gathered all his training years in Europe and took it over to the States to build up his own winery. And Dominik worked abroad in the States as well. Is there something you picked up there and took it back to this tradition-driven company at home in Kaltstadt to loosen it up somehow? Or
well, I mean, you always learn a lot of things, and mainly you learn the things how not to do it, right? Yeah. When you're back home, right? But no, just joking. It's there's a lot of, you know, there's a few things, not a lot of things. There's a lot of things I learned for life, but there's a few things I learned, and where the US, I think especially the US is ahead of us. Is like, you know, watching the vineyards with the, you know, the back with the NASA, with the, you know, the activity of the chlorophyll and all that stuff. That's and the water, since they always have water issues, and that watching the vineyards from space basically to see how things go, and that's something which is not really happening here, not yet. It's coming with a climate change. That's something which was impressive for me, for sure. And also there's one side effect for the, and now Ted mentioned the tractor driving, but what I like is or I especially there's more like an economical thing, is that you have a lot of contractors, you know, farming the vineyard the way you do want them to do, and here in you know, everyone has their own tractor, maybe two, and especially if it's a Fendt, life is perfect. But if you make the calculation, you need about 50 hectares to run a Fendt, maybe more than that, and then you need to run it for 10 years. We have 12 hectares, and that's something which the US especially, I think, is ahead of us by having teams and having companies doing the labor for, you know, to use the machine and save money on that side. That's something I think I quite learned. I learned, of course, I learned a few things from Ted if it comes to the Pinot making, maybe some Chardonnay as well.
But does it apply to your day-to-day work? I mean, Dominik, as a Riesling, well, you're obviously working with different grape varieties as well, but Riesling is really
it does a little bit, not to the Riesling, but, you know, since we also make a little bit of Pinot Noir, which is like the playground. We have, like, if you come to a winery like Koehler-Ruprecht, you cannot change things, not philosophy. But you do have a playground in that Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So there's, I mean, Riesling is something we know how to do it, and there can be way better Pinot and Chardonnays from Germany. So that's kind of the little playground I have here, and play around a little bit. But yeah. But the main thing I went to work with Tate was first of all, it's been one of the best Pinots I've had from California, and the second of all was like to see how the biodynamic farming really works in a surrounding as a more or less as a farm project and not only block by block vineyards, you know. Yeah.
I gotta say the Saumagen Auslese is really singing now. Beautiful wine, and the amazing thing about it is really this combination of fruit and yeasty flavors and this bright acidity that breaks all of this. I mean, there's quite a lot of body there, but it's really been broken up by the fresh acidity that breaks.
That's the beauty of 2016. That's it has basically there's not much missing in it.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid that there won't. I mean, the vintages are good and getting better, but this is special. Yeah, I don't think I need to have a plan B. I think I can stay in the winery for a little longer.
Maybe the plan Magnum.
The only time Dominik and I experienced wines maybe a little bit sharper than Riesling was he and I went to the Jurançon a few years ago, and Petit Manseng is quite the palate ripper, that's for sure. Remember that, Dominik? That was
that is something. The acidity in the dry Jurançon is something very special.
I think after a day of that, Konstantin, I had a new definition for palate masochism, right? It was like, okay, dry Petit Manseng, that'll wake you right up.
Yeah. After being in Rioja before, right? After
exactly.
It's definitely in the AM, right?
I got another question for you, Ted, because Dominik just alluded to the whole climate change situation, and obviously that affects everyone all around the world. That's kind of that's at the core of it. But in California, obviously, right now there was quite a lot, or for the last few months at least, there was quite a lot of press about the fires. And I think the 17. I mean, you were in touch in 17, I think, because the fires were quite late. But can you maybe just tell us a little bit about the situation right now with regards to the fires and for me, what is really interesting is what can winemakers do in the future to kind of combat it, to make sure that it doesn't influence.
Yeah, it's a big subject, but just very quickly, since we're already at an hour, what I would say is that I drove through Napa Valley 2 weeks ago, everyone, and of course I live right next door in a sense, and I knew that it had been touched. I was very sobered by my drive from Calistoga down to south of St. Helena and then back over to Santa Rosa. The extent of the damage was pretty shocking. And we've been living with this now really since 2015. That was the Valley Fire up in Lake County. And so we feel like we're on the cutting edge of climate change, right? That we're really experiencing it in a dramatic way, much like they expected through catastrophic events, right? And the subtler events, if we all start picking earlier and things like that, I mean, that's nothing compared to floods or wildfires, et cetera. And we have an enormous fuel load because California hasn't burned for so long, because once the white people came here, we really suppressed fire completely, right? It was not allowed to happen, whereas the indigenous community had in fact been cultivating fire for thousands of years throughout all of the West in the United States. So we have a lot to learn.
All right. Yeah. It's just such an obvious way way of seeing climate change. Actually, in Germany, when it comes to wine, we obviously, I mean, we are all worried about climate change as well, but when it comes to wine, it probably has impacted us rather in a positive way, where we, in some regions where we didn't.
I agree on that, Konstantin, if it comes to the wine product, the quality of the wine, but not in the vineyards. So we do have our vineyards, yeah. But if it comes to the quality, 100%, yes, we benefit 100%. Yeah. No.
So what is it you are doing, Dominik, to kind of work against climate change?
You know, we do work, but you know, the canopy is not as high as it used to be in the 10 years ago. Yeah. So we don't. We try to do not leaf plucking. We try to keep the grapes in shade as long as possible. And then there's a few things we try to keep the soil cooler by having a real working cover crop and keep the moist in the soil. And in some vineyards we do need to do, in the younger vineyards we do need to do drip irrigation. That is a must if we don't want to lose the vines. That's something which is hard, but it is what it is. No.
Yeah, Konstantin, I didn't mean to go too big picture on you. We absolutely are looking to changes in trellis, no question about that, to protect the people. Yeah, and we started those experiments a couple years ago, so we're open to everything. All cards are on the table for sure.
Do you also feel that the impact of the climate change will also allow you to get into vineyards or into places on the Sonoma coast that weren't, well, where you weren't able to make wine before because it was
there'll be two things. There'll be places that were not viable before, and our average yields will be more commercial, right? So if you look at the pivot's fine, you could kind of get a sense from the picture that it's a relatively mild place, but some of our other sites like the Haven, you're talking about 20 hectares per hectare if you're lucky on average, probably less than that. So climate change is a benefit in terms of better set. Yes, that is true. Yeah.
There was one question for you, Ted, I think, with regards to Chardonnay, even though we are tasting the Pinot, but she was interested in knowing whether you do bâtonnage and how often in Chardonnay.
Oh, yeah, no stirring in Chardonnay, no bâtonnage at all. We don't feel like we need it. I think it really is a regional thing, right? If you're in a place where the Chardonnays are leaner and tighter, maybe you want to do some, but we don't feel like we need to. Yeah, so we stay away from it.
All right.
Yeah, quite
do we have any more questions? Sebastian, anything?
No.
No?
No, I'm thinking. No.
I think
all is said and done. Yeah.
We're getting. I'm sure that we have only touched on all of the topics that we could have talked about. So I think there's content for another few hours, but obviously Ted needs to get to work because it's early in the morning. So
get your work done.
We can obviously now relax with those two beautiful wines here in front of us, here on the German side. But I think it was really interesting having you both here, because it's such a funny thing. I mean, the wine world is such a big place, and there's so much to learn and know. But it's amazing to see that two wineries on two different sides of the globe, making two completely different wines, still wine styles, still kind of have a lot in common, and it's obviously great to also know that you're friends and you've been. You've worked together, and obviously now Koehler-Ruprecht is also importing Ted's wines. So if you're in Germany and want to get some of Ted's wines, then you can do that through Koehler-Ruprecht, obviously. But it's great to see that those friendships develop in this wild world of wine, And yeah, I think we touched upon quite a lot of really interesting subjects. I'm pretty sure that I'll definitely finish those 2 glasses tonight. So I'm really looking forward to tasting those wines side by side for the rest of the evening. And yeah, I want to say thank you to all of you, Sebastian, Ted, and Dominik, and thanks for everyone attending. I mean, we had quite a lot of people tuning in, so that's great to see. So thank you very much.
Most enjoyable Monday evening. Thank you a lot.
Sebastian,
Yeah.
thanks for coming, and Konstantin, thanks so much to you both for sitting in with us. That was really a pleasure. It's been a joy, and I knew that Dominik sooner or later would tell me to get to work. I was just waiting for that to come. So anyway, I miss you, buddy. We'll see you soon, I hope, right? Stay safe in the meantime.
You as well. Of course.
Okay. All right, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a lovely evening.
Yeah.